The bell above the diner door chimed and the laughter died. Josh Turner's gaze swept the room. Familiar faces, old neighbors. But no one met his eyes. Then Karen's voice cut through the silence, cold and sharp. "We don't serve PTSD freaks here." But what happened next would shake this quiet town to its core. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Josh's chest tightened, the air in the diner suddenly thick and suffocating. He stared at Karen, her smug, tight-lipped expression a wall of quiet hostility. His fists, clenched beneath the table, trembled with a simmering fury. Around him, the low hum of conversations continued, punctuated by the clatter of silverware and the hiss of the kitchen's griddle. Yet it all seemed distant, a dull murmur beneath the roaring pulse in his ears. He looked around again, desperately scanning the room. Old Man Johnson, who used to cheer for him at high school football games, quickly looked down at his plate. Sarah and David, the couple who once hosted the town's Memorial Day barbecue, exchanged a glance and turned away. A group of young men in the far corner, their laughter a sharp, grating noise, leaned closer to whisper, one of them casting a sideways glance at Josh before smirking. It wasn't just Karen's words that cut. It was the silent approval of the room, a quiet conspiracy of indifference. The kind of betrayal that didn't need raised voices or threats. Just looks, just whispers. A town he once knew, a place he had fought to protect, now turned against him, all with averted eyes and polite, practiced smiles. Josh swallowed, a bitter taste rising in his throat. His mind raced back to another table, another place, a makeshift mess hall in Fallujah, where even in the chaos, he knew the men around him had his back, where laughter and arguments were loud, raw, but never hollow, where a problem meant hands would reach out, not turn away. Here, in the place he called home, he was a ghost, a specter to be avoided, a problem better ignored. "Karen," he said, his voice low but steady, the words sharp enough to cut. "I fought for this country, for all of you." The laughter stopped. The room went still, the hum of conversations dying into a tense, suffocating silence. But Karen's smile only tightened, her eyes narrowing. "And we're grateful. But maybe you should have left your baggage over there." A few chuckles sounded from the corner, low but unmistakable. Josh's pulse thundered in his ears. His vision blurred slightly, the edges of his world darkening. Rage surged within him, but he forced it down, jaw clenching until it ached. Without another word, he stood, the legs of the chair scraping against the linoleum with a sharp, grating sound. He didn't look back as he walked to the door, his boots heavy against the floor. The bell chimed again, a cold, hollow echo in his ears. Outside, the sun was too bright, the sky too open. Josh paused on the sidewalk, breathing in the crisp air, trying to steady himself. But there was no comfort in it, no peace, only the raw, bitter realization sinking in. He had survived bullets, bombs, and hellish nights in the desert, only to come home and find his war wasn't over. It had simply changed its shape. Josh walked the cracked, uneven sidewalks of Oakwood, his boots scuffing against the dusty pavement, each step heavy, each breath sharp. The town hadn't changed. Not really. Same sagging awnings, same faded signs above the mom-and-pop shops, same rust-speckled trucks parked along Main Street, but something in the air had twisted, a subtle, suffocating pressure that clung to his skin like the grit of desert sand. He could feel it, the weight of eyes that didn't dare meet his, of voices that lowered as he passed, of whispers that seemed to coil around his ears. He had once been Josh Turner, the high school quarterback, the kid who worked summers at Hank's garage, the son of a proud, quiet man who spoke little but held respect like a shield. Now, he was someone else. Something else. A ghost. A rumor. A cautionary tale. He tried to drown it out, to shake off the gnawing sense of isolation. The community center seemed like a chance, a place to be useful again, to claw his way back into a life with purpose. The director's smile was too quick, too brittle, her words laced with the quiet, desperate hope that he would simply disappear. "We'll get back to you," she said, but her gaze was already sliding past him, locking on some distant, safer point beyond his shoulder. The hardware store was worse. The bell over the door chimed, and for a moment he felt normal, just another man looking for tools and timber. But the cashier's hands trembled as she handed him his change, the coins clinking against the counter as her eyes darted to the manager, a heavy-set man with a balding head who didn't bother hiding his scrutiny. Josh felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a cold, shameful sweat prickling at his back. His hand tightened around the change, the edges of the coins biting into his palm. Home should have been a refuge, but his father, a man of few words and unyielding principles, offered only a quiet wall of stoicism. "You came back. That's more than most can say. But you have to earn respect again, son. Folks are wary of what they don't understand." The words struck harder than he let on, the unspoken judgment buried beneath them, sharp as a knife. His mother's embrace was softer, warmer, but even there, beneath her gentle touch, was the ghost of fear. The way her fingers lingered a moment too long against his hair, as if reassuring herself he was still there, still whole, still her son. But the way she looked at him when he turned to leave, that flicker of worry, the quiet dread that he might come back worse, or not at all. And so, Josh retreated to the small, cramped room that had once been his childhood sanctuary, but now felt like a cage. The medals on the shelf, gleaming under the pale yellow light, seemed to taunt him. Achievements that meant nothing here. Badges of honor from a world that had swallowed his brothers in arms and spit him out alone. His uniform, pressed and folded in the closet, was a ghost's skin, a relic of a man who had once stood tall, shoulders back, eyes steady. Now those eyes stared back at him from the mirror, hollow and dark, the faint scars on his cheek catching the light like pale, twisted lines. His breath came shallow, his chest tight, the silence pressing down until it felt like a weight on his lungs. His fists clenched, the knuckles whitening, veins standing out like cords. But there was nothing to strike, no enemy to fight. Just the darkness that seemed to swell around him, a tide of shame and bitterness, growing, seeping into his bones. Josh sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, the stillness of the room unbearable. Memories surged, unbidden. The shouts, the searing heat of the desert, the thud of mortar rounds, the cries of his brothers. But here, in this quiet, ordinary town, those screams were just echoes, fading, forgotten, and he was alone. More alone than he had ever been, even in the sandstorms of Iraq. The basement of the old church smelled faintly of damp stone and faded incense, a scent that seemed to cling to the thick air like a quiet, persistent whisper. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting long, restless shadows across the faces of those who had gathered. Men and women filled the mismatched chairs, a mix of old folding seats, a few wooden ones borrowed from the chapel above. Some sat upright, rigid as if on guard duty, while others leaned forward, their faces shadowed beneath worn caps stitched with military insignias. Josh Turner felt a tightness in his chest loosen slightly as he stepped in, his boots muffled by the threadbare carpet. Here, among the quiet murmurs and weary faces, he was not an outcast, not a ghost. He was one of them, one of the ones who had returned but hadn't truly come home. A nod from an older man with silver hair and deep lines carved across his face. A brief, firm clasp on the shoulder from a woman missing her left arm, but whose grip was strong and steady with the right. Small gestures, but they spoke volumes. In the center of the room, leaning against the old, creaking lectern, was Mike, a grizzled Marine with a prosthetic leg that glinted dully beneath the faded fabric of his jeans. His voice was rough, gravel scraping over stone, but there was a fire in his eyes that seemed untouched by time. "They don't want us here, huh?" Mike's voice echoed in the low-ceilinged room. "Well, tough luck. We served, we bled, and we came back. This is our home too. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if they look at us like we're broken. They can't erase us. They won't." Josh's gaze swept the room. Heads were nodding, jaws clenched. A man with burn scars twisting across his neck gave a low murmur of agreement. An elderly woman in a worn navy cap, her face lined but her eyes sharp, lifted her chin defiantly. They were wounded, yes, visibly and invisibly, but they were not gone. Something stirred in Josh's chest, a heat he hadn't felt in weeks, a pulse of defiance cutting through the shame that had clung to him like oil. Mike's words were not grand, not poetic, but they were a challenge, a call to stand, to exist, to matter. Josh didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fire in the room was enough, spreading, catching, burning away the shadows of isolation that had pressed against him for so long. That night, back in his cramped, too familiar room, Josh stared at his phone, the pale glow illuminating his face. His fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation gnawing at him. But then, Mike's voice echoed in his mind. "They can't erase us." He tapped out a message, raw and unpolished. "I fought for my country, but it seems my country doesn't want me back. Is that what we fought for?" He almost deleted it, the old reflexes of doubt clawing at him, but instead he hit post and set the phone aside, expecting nothing. Sleep came fitfully, but when he woke, the screen was alive with notifications. Hundreds, then thousands. Messages from fellow veterans, some sharing their own struggles, some simply saying, "I hear you, brother." But there were others too. Strangers, people he had never met, telling him to stop whining, to get over it. The bile of hate, sharp and cutting, but it didn't drown out the support. It couldn't. Local news reached out, the small town's name suddenly a headline, and Josh's words, simple, desperate, defiant, were being shared. And Ellie's diner? The place that had once been a warm refuge in his memories now found itself in the harsh light of a public reckoning. But Josh wasn't thinking about Ellie's. He was thinking of the faces in that basement, the tired eyes that had gleamed with fierce pride. He was thinking of Mike's voice, the iron beneath the gravel. He was thinking of himself, standing again, unashamed. The roar of motorcycles filled the air like distant thunder, a low, steady rumble that grew louder, rolling down Main Street with the weight of a coming storm. Chrome gleamed beneath the sharp morning light, leather jackets and faded vests bearing patches and insignias from every branch of the armed forces. Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force. Veterans from neighboring towns, some gray-haired and weathered, others young but bearing the same haunted resolve in their eyes. They rode in a steady line, wheels thundering against the asphalt, engines growling in defiant harmony. Josh Turner rode at the front, a quiet determination on his face. Beside him, Mike rode with the same steel in his gaze, his prosthetic leg resting steady against the bike's frame. The sight of them, men and women who had given their youth, their strength, and for some, even their limbs for their country, was a force of nature, a tide that no one in Oakwood could ignore. The diner's windows rattled faintly as the motorcycles parked along the curb, a steel curtain of iron and leather. The quiet, sleepy town stirred with a nervous energy. Curtains shifted in nearby houses, curious eyes peeking through. Smartphones were raised, cameras capturing the moment. People whispered, their voices a low, uncertain murmur. Josh stepped off his bike, his boots landing with a solid, resolute thud. Around him, the veterans dismounted, their faces calm but unyielding. He adjusted the collar of his worn jacket, took a breath, and walked toward the diner door. His friends followed, a silent but unwavering wave at his back. He didn't need to speak. Their presence spoke for them all. The bell above the door chimed, a faint, almost feeble sound against the heavy silence that fell over the diner's interior. Karen was there, her face pale, her forced smile trembling. We're busy today," she stammered, her voice cracking, but the lie was obvious. Only a few scattered patrons sat frozen in their seats, their gazes flickering between the veterans and the door. Mike stepped forward, his voice a steady, gravelly boom. "We'll be seated." Karen's smile crumbled. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a stack of menus, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The veterans began to fill the booths, the old counter seats, their laughter rising, their voices warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread in Karen's gaze. Conversations erupted, stories were exchanged, and the clatter of silverware was drowned beneath a chorus of shared memories and easy camaraderie. But Josh didn't join in the loud laughter. He stood by the door, his gaze calm and steady, his silence more powerful than any shout. Karen's eyes met his for a moment, and she wilted, shrinking beneath that quiet, unwavering look. Without anger, without raised voices, Josh had become the force she feared most, a man who refused to be erased. She retreated to the kitchen, her footsteps quick and unsteady. But the veterans stayed, their presence a tidal wave that swept away the quiet cruelty that had once poisoned this place. The same people who once whispered about Josh now watched with wide eyes, their phones capturing a scene they hadn't expected. By the next morning, the rumors had already spread. The story, the images, the footage. Veterans filling the diner, a silent wall of iron and resolve. And on the glass door of Ellie's diner, a new sign appeared. "All are welcome here." The letters bold, a promise etched in black. But Karen was gone, her shift surrendered, her name tag left on the counter. A cold, metal reminder of a face that no longer met the eyes of the town she had tried to divide. Josh walked past the diner later that day, the street quieter now, the motorcycles gone. But he saw people inside, laughing, sharing meals, and they looked out at him with smiles, some waving, some offering quiet nods. He returned the gesture, a faint but genuine smile breaking through the stern lines of his face. He didn't need to step inside. His battle wasn't about the pancakes, the coffee, or even the booth by the window. It was about something far greater. A simple truth that couldn't be silenced. A place that was his. A life he wouldn't surrender. The story of Josh Turner became more than just an account of one man's quiet rebellion. It became a spark, a reminder of what a community could be, of what it should be. The town of Oakwood, once a place of cold stares and whispered judgments, began to warm, its frozen heart slowly thawing. Where once Josh walked with his head down, feeling like a ghost among the living, now people greeted him with nods and smiles, hesitant at first, then genuine. The veterans group, which had once met in the cramped, dim basement of the old church, now overflowed with new faces, men and women who had spent years feeling forgotten, their pain a silent weight they carried alone, now found themselves surrounded by brothers and sisters. The laughter in those meetings grew louder. The stories shared not just of battles fought overseas, but of struggles back home. and how they could help one another. What had begun as a quiet gathering transformed into an organization with purpose. They held fundraisers, using the money to provide therapy for struggling veterans, to buy groceries for those who had fallen on hard times, and even to help fix up old houses. Josh found himself at the center of it all, but not by choice. He hadn't meant to become a voice, a symbol, yet the world seemed to have decided that for him. Local news stations reached out, then state representatives. He was invited to speak at schools, to stand behind podiums at veterans events. Nervous at first, he found that the words came easily once he began, his voice steady, his story raw but powerful. He spoke not of glory or heroism, but of survival, of what it meant to come home and feel like a stranger, of the quiet wounds no one could see. And he spoke of the men and women who stood with him, those who refused to disappear, who rebuilt their lives together. The audience listened, some with misty eyes, others with resolute nods. When he stepped down from the stage, they didn't just clap. They reached out, shook his hand, thanked him for his service, and more importantly, for his courage to speak. But even as Josh's name spread, even as his story found its way into newspapers and community bulletins, his real victories were quieter. They were the moments when he walked into Hank's garage and heard the grizzled old mechanic call out, "Morning, Josh," with a grin. They were the mornings spent with his mother over steaming cups of coffee, the warm sunlight spilling across the kitchen table, her gentle laughter reminding him of everything he had fought to protect. They were the text messages from old friends, friends who had once stayed silent, now reaching out, some apologizing, others simply wanting to catch up. Josh found himself walking down Main Street without that familiar weight on his shoulders. His gaze met those of the people around him, and instead of turning away, they smiled. Some even stopped to chat. He helped Mrs. Dawson carry her groceries, gave Old Man Johnson a hand when his truck stalled, and exchanged nods with the high schoolers hanging out by the soda shop. He wasn't just a story, he was a part of the town again. He survived Iraq, but his real battle had been here, in this quiet town, among the faces he once knew and the ones who had turned away. Now, they didn't turn away. And in those simple gestures, in the warmth of a handshake, in the bright smile of his mother each morning, Josh found something he hadn't realized he needed. A place, a purpose, a home. For the first time in a long time, Josh felt not just like a survivor, but like a man who had won